Welcome to Excel Magic Trick number 625. Hey, if you want to download this workbook, click on the link below the video. Hey, in this video, we want to see how to create a table using the table feature that lists expenses and revenues for certain properties. We're going to have a separate table over here that lists our properties. Once we add our transactional data to this table, we then want to have a running total net income for each property over here and be able to change the beginning of the month date here, show the end of the month, and then have all of the revenues and expenses update for each property. All right, so really, we have a little database-like thing here. Now, I'm going to create this using the table feature. We're also going to use the table feature over here. So if we add extra properties, the whole system here will update. Now, first, I have a field name up here, and then records. Records are rows. Over here, there'll be transactions, right? We'll have a date, property name, revenue, expense, description, amount. Here, they're just a single element, the property name. Now, I want to use the Excel table feature. The advantage to using the Excel table feature is that it will have dynamic ranges. So as we add new elements here or here, everything will update. I'm going to click in, well, first, table, field names at the top, records and rows, and there's got to be blanks all the way around. So I very carefully separated this table from this one with a blank column. I click in a single cell, and I use Control-T. It says it's going to guess right because I set it up, field name at the top, records and rows, and blanks all the way around. I'm going to click OK. All right, now I'm going to do the same thing over here, but I want to add one transaction first, because another advantage of the table feature is if I have a date format here and data validation here and here and formatting here, and I do all of that first, then create a table. As I add new records, all of that will carry forward. So the data validation will carry forward, the date formatting, the currency formatting. So the first transaction is today. That means there's a fence. The column needs to be wider, so I'm going to double click that. Property, I'm going to use data validation. Now, data validation is up here somewhere. Data validation. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Alt-DL. Tab, I don't want to allow any value. I want to tap L to get to list. I want a list that will be connected to the cells over here. So I hit Tab, the source. I highlight this range right here. Right? G2 to G6. But the cool thing is, because it's a table feature, when I add a new property over here, that G6 will change to G7. So it's a dynamic range. Click OK. All right, so I'm going to say property 1. Now, revenue expenses, I only want the word revenue or expenses because we're in a very important. We don't want any misspelled words over here, because over on this sheet, we're going to depend on the fact that the word revenue and expenses are here to pull the right numbers for each property, given that it's a revenue or expense. So I'm going to use data validation here. Alt-DL, Tab, L, Tab. In this case, I don't need a whole table. I only need the word revenue. And I better be careful here, because I'm a horrible speller. I hope I spelled that right. Comma. Now, the interesting thing about a data validation source is normally when we put text into formulas or other parts of Excel, you have to put it in double quotes. But here, you can just, this text box, this source text box is just programmed. Just put the word separated by a comma and click OK. All right, so this first one will be a revenue. I'm just going to type something here. You'd put a real description there. And then the amount. So we got 1,525. Control Enter. And I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Control-Shift-4, which is the keyboard shortcut for currency. By the way, just to show you that this drop down is dynamic, I'm going to click Escape. If I type a new property here, notice when I did that, the table is expanded, and now there it is. All right, I'm going to Control-Z to undo, Control-Z, because I didn't really want that. I was just showing. Now, click in a single cell. Remember, the definition of a table is field names at the top, records in row. When you convert it to a table, you select a single cell. Make sure that there's blanks all the way around, or row headers, column headers. Control T, click OK. Now let's add a new transaction. And there's a couple ways to do this. You can click here and type, or if your cursor is in the last cell in the last record, meaning last row, hit Tab. All right, so 6, I'm going to just put today's date. This will be property 2. This is a revenue. And this one is 2,500. I'm going to hit Tab, not Enter, and it adds a new one. So I'm going to say 6-16. Now notice I just typed 616, but when I hit Tab, it's carrying this format forward, right? Normally when you do 616 in the default cells in Excel, it doesn't show 4 years, but that formatting is carrying forward. This will be property 1. This is an expense. Just some. And then this one is 450. Tab. I'll just do one more 6, 4, 10. Control Enter. All right, now let's go over. Obviously, we'd add lots more records, but now let's go over here. We have one dynamic table here. This column is dependent on that one. This is a dynamic table here, and now these formulas we build are going to be dependent on the fact that it's dynamic over there. As we add new records over here, all of the numbers will be reflected over here. Now let's do the end date. So we want to just be able to type any date here, right? Have an end date here, and then have all these formulas show you the revenues, expenses, and net incomes per month, right? So I'm going to use the end of month function. It's totally amazing. Start date, well, there it is. End of month. Now this gives you the end of month. If I want the end of next month, I'd put comma for month 1. If I wanted the end of last month, I'd put -1. If I want the end of this month, 0. It extends in either direction. 3 months ahead, you'd put a 3. But 0 is for the end of this month. And by the way, I better put a date formatting. Control 1, date. What's cool about the end of month is if I were to change this to 2, the month 2, this is leap year. That function knows leap year. I'm going to Control Z. If you were in a version besides 2007 or 10, or you didn't have the analysis tool pack added in earlier versions, you'd have to use date and then the year of this. This is to create the end of the month. The month. Say the month of this. That'll give me the year and the month. And the date needs a year, month, and day. And we really want the end. And the problem with putting a day here is we don't know if there's 30, 31, 28, or 29. So I'm actually going to backspace. I'm going to add 1. This will always go to next month. If you put a 1 here, it gives you the first of the month. But if you put a 0, it knows to go backwards. If you put -8, it knows to go backwards. So because 1 says day, that's the first of the month. If you put a 0, that's the first number to the left of 1. So it goes back to the last day of last month. Right? And that'll work no matter what. OK, and now this setup here, we're actually going to have 1, 2, because we have to, from this transactional table, get dates. And this is a between criteria. The date has to be greater than or equal to that, and less than or equal to that. So that's 2 criteria right there. Then we also need to pick up the property, because this field will have the criteria for property. So we're going to have to take criteria from here, and we want to know if it's a revenue or expense. All right, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4 criteria. And I'm going to use SUMIFS. This works in 2007 and 10. In earlier versions, sum product would be a way to go. Now, before I build our SUMIFS formula here, I want to go over to the transaction table sheet. And I want to see what happens when you build formulas and your ranges come from an Excel table. I'm going to type an equal sign and highlight this column. it gives us the name of the table and in square brackets the name of the field. Now I don't want to use those in this formula here. I'm going to click Escape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat. Remember, the advantage is we have dynamic ranges and the formatting carries forward. But while I build my formulas, I'm going to convert it back to a range. And then as soon as I'm done with the formulas, I'm going to convert it back to a table. So I'm going to right-click some cell in the table, point to Table, and Convert to Range. Click Yes. All right, now I'm going to go over and build my formula. Now, another thing that happens when you're building formulas between sheets is you're going to get a lot of extraneous sheet references. So I want to go up to View, New Window. Now, right now, notice up here it says Excel Magic for 925. So I'm going to go to New Window. What? Now it says 2. I'm going to Alt-Tab. Alt-Tab. Now it says 1. There's actually 2 of the very same workbook open. Now I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to say Arrange All. And I'm going to say horizontally. So I'm going to go up to View. Let's not do horizontally. Let's try vertically. All right, so there we go. I'm going to click over here. It's actually, see, it says 2 there, and then over here it says 1. It's the very same workbook. It gives you 2 views of the same workbook. Now I'm going to come over here. This one is the sheet I want, but over here I want to click on the transaction. So I'm going to click right there, because I'm going to highlight some range here. And I'm going to hold Control and roll my wheel. 1, 2, 3 fields I want. And this I'm going to make a little bit bigger. I'm going to highlight and use the keyboard shortcut Alt-WG. That was View, Zoom to Selection. All right, so you ready? Now when I build my formula, I can take cell references, criteria. These are all going to be our cell references for criteria from this sheet. And I can work from this sheet. Equals SUMIFS, sum range. I'm going to click over here. And notice the scroll bars are there now. Highlight this range right here. Notice the sheet references. The sheet references we do want because it needs to go. It needs to know to go over to the sheet. But I'm going to make sure and hit the F4 key to lock that. And it needs to be locked in all directions. All right, now I'm going to click back or type a comma, and it says criteria range. I'm going to do my 2 dates first. So I'm going to highlight that range and hit F4 to lock it. All right, so that's criteria range 1. Now we're going to have to include this twice because we have 2 criteria. Greater than or equal to the lower date, less than or equal to the upper date. So now I'm looking at my screen, tip, comma, and the criteria. Now I'm going to have to put my comparative operator. And in fact, watch this. I don't think I'm going to move this over here like this. And I'm going to move this over here like this. I need that date, but I also need the comparative operator. So put the comparative operators in double quotes, and then I put less than or equal to 2 separate symbols and double quotes. So the comparative operator in double quotes. And then I need to join that. So I use the ampersand, Shift 7. And I click on the lower date. And I'm going to hit the F4 key. That needs to be locked in all directions. Wherever I copy this, that needs to be locked. There's criteria 1, comma, now criteria range 2. I click over here, highlight on the date, hit the F4 key, criteria range 2, comma. And then double quote greater than, whoops. I did that incorrect. I know some of you were just screaming. This right here was looking there. Obviously, if I want anything from this column, it's got to be greater than or equal to the lower date. And this one has to be less than or equal to. All right? Right? It makes sense. Bigger than or equal to the first day, less than or equal to the last day. All right, and then I join it, Shift 7. Click on that cell right there, F4. Now, the nice thing about these split windows is that when I click on a cell reference here, it doesn't put in the big sheet reference. If we hadn't of viewed these in the same workbook 2 separate ways, every time I went over here and clicked, or over here, it would put in sheet references. So that's the advantage of showing these two windows in this view. All right, so there's criteria 2, comma. Now we have criteria 3, range 3. That's going to be property. So I'm going to click over here, highlight. There it is, F4. Comma, I get to criteria. Now, I'm going to click over here and then click on property 1. Now, this cell reference here, when I copy this formula over to the expense columns, I need it locked there. But when I copy this big, huge formula down to the next row with property 2, next row with property 3, it needs to move relatively. So I'm going to have to lock this. I'm going to hit the F4 key 1, 2, 3 times. Column reference A is locked, but not the row reference. Locked when I copy this way, not locked when I copy down, comma. Criteria range 4, that is going to be for our revenue or expenses. So I'm going to click over here, highlight. I see that it's C2 to C5. I hit F4. Right, there's criteria range 4, comma. Criteria 4, the revenue or expense. So I click and then click on that cell. Now this one is the opposite. When I copy the formula down for all of these properties, it needs to be locked on that. But when I copy it over to the expense column, the B needs to move to C. So I'm going to hit the F4 key and lock only the row reference, but not the column. Close. Look at this huge screen tip here. We got our criteria 4, close parentheses, Control Enter. And now I copy it over and down. All right, we don't have any there. Now, if I were to change this to 7, I should then have just 1. All the rest of these are zeros because when we look at our split screen over here, we don't have any. Actually, we don't need to have this open anymore. I'm going to close this. And then I'm going to expand that right there. All right. Let's move back, and we'll test it in just a moment. See if it's dynamic. All right, now we have this. Let's do our net income formula equals revenues minus expenses. 1 cell to my left minus 2 cells to my left. Control Enter, and then double click and send it down. Now I'm going to very quickly come over here. Now I'm going to make it a table again. Click in any cell, Control T, Enter. Remember, the whole point of this is to get a dynamic table. So let's tab to add a new record. I'm going to do 6/20 tab. Now, when I converted it back to a table, it's not carrying it forward. So watch this. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to highlight the whole column, Control 1, and now when I apply date, it will carry forward. Notice the data validation did carry forward, and our data validation there. I don't think our formatting carried forward here. Now I highlight the whole column and Control-Shift-4 for currency. Now when I hit Tab and then 6-25 Tab, it's carrying it forward. And so I'll say property 4. I'm going to say expense. Oh, I'm using, you don't, in this case, we don't have to use the autocomplete because we only have, the drop down here. It will disallow, if I were to do something like this, it would tell me, forget it, cancel. But now I can use autocomplete. So I type in expense. This person, I'm going to say 400, so they'll have a minus, a net loss. I will do one more, maybe a 8/5 property. Notice autocomplete will not work here because it's not finding, it doesn't know which one you want, right? Auto 5 revenue. 5,020. All right, so now when I come over here, you can see the table is dynamic. It's picking up everything. And if I change this to 7, I think I have, so now it's got that. I think I even have an 8 in there, right? But this is dynamic. The only last thing we might do, and maybe it's just as easy to just add, if you add a new property, we could put a formula here. I don't think I'm going to do it. We could do a formula there that would pick it up, but it's just easy to type it here and then copy these formula down. So if you were to get property 6, you could do it that way. All right, that's a little bit about building a summing formula based on 4 criteria for certain properties and our property transaction table. Given that their revenues and expense in a certain date, we summed on that other sheet. All right, we'll see you next video.